President Ramaphosa underwhelms again. Senzo Mchunu leaves. Firoz Cachalia in. Is this vindication for General Mkhwanazi? Welcome to this special live episode dissecting what happened last night in President Ramaphosa's announcement of yet another commission of inquiry. Fam, I just want to give a shout out to the sponsor of today's episode, Pace Car Rental. Use promo code SMWX for 10% off your next car rental and make sure you show Pace some love as they're showing this channel some love. Now, let's get into the episode. Spread the fire. Welcome back to SMWX. If you're new around here, I'm Sizwe Mpofu-Walsh, and on this channel, we explore South African politics through interviews and analysis. Comment down below on this live stream and enter some of your questions. We'll see if we can get to them at the end. Wow. This country never stops giving drama. And last night, President Cyril Ramaphosa came before the nation, and I want to show you a quick clip of what he announced because we're going to explore this in all its depth and complexity going forward. We're going to explore, number one, the background to this announcement. Number two, the announcement of the commission, whether it's a good or a bad thing. Spoiler alert, underwhelming. Then we're going to look at the appointment of Firoz Cachalia, Professor Firoz Cachalia, as acting police commissioner. And then we're going to focus on what are some of the unanswered questions, because as usual, the president left more questions than answered. Let's have a look at how he announced this new commission of inquiry last night.
These allegations, therefore, call for an urgent and comprehensive investigation. To address these allegations and the implications of these allegations, I'm establishing a judicial
Remember when Cyril Ramaphosa could do no wrong, where he would take a walk on the Sea Point promenade and people would praise him? He was clothed in crimson and finery. He's fallen a long way from there. There's a lot of public disappointment, and I echo the sentiments. A government of commissions, a government of dialogues, a government of delay tactics, but ultimately a government that has promised much, that has promised swift action, but has never really delivered. And I just ask you, is service delivery any better than 5 years ago? Is the criminal justice system any better off after these commissions? What can a dialogue really achieve that swift governmental action cannot achieve? It felt like this was the culmination of everything that is frustrating about the Ramaphosa presidency. A huge moment of opportunity arises for leadership, for decisive action, for steps forward. And instead of seizing that moment and meeting the national appetite for decisiveness, the president will always defer, delay, deny, and postpone. And that's really what we got last night. Now, I want to dive into this in more depth, and in order to do that, we need to take a few steps back, because as this situation unfolds, you notice new layers, and there were some layers in our massive video last week in terms of the background of this that I wanted to pick up on that I didn't notice in the first place. The first, in terms of General Mkhwanazi's announcement, was how many people from within the KZN police establishment were around him during his announcement. It wasn't just Mkhwanazi, because when we see it on the cameras, we often see clips of just Mkhwanazi talking. He clearly has the backing of his province on this, and I thought that was a fascinating thing to observe. We then also had President Ramaphosa in Rio while Mkhwanazi was making his announcement. And what I found fascinating about that, maybe I'm reading too much into it, but it seemed in some ways to disable the president, because Mkhwanazi made an announcement while Ramaphosa was asleep in a different time zone. And that left a gap where the president couldn't react because he was asleep in Rio. And I wondered whether, people have spoken about Mkhwanazi making this announcement when the president was away, but was it also calculated so that he couldn't react very quickly to it, and it left that vacuum of things to explode into speculation as well? So I found that an interesting wrinkle in the story. Ramaphosa comes out on the SABC and actually sounds, you hardly get huge emotion out of Ramaphosa, but he sounds very angry and disturbed by these revelations, as if this is not the first time he's hearing about this, maybe not these specific revelations, because he said Mkhwanazi hadn't given him a heads up. But look, he's the president of the country. Intelligence is in his office. He sits with interministerial committees that discuss this stuff all the time. He must know that there is a serious rot in the police. The fact that he hasn't told the nation about it also tells us other things. But the fact that it has been public in some... Finally, interesting comment IFP premier. But again, in terms of the coherence and the consolidation of the voice in the KZN government, everyone is on the same page, from the people who are there with Mkhwanazi to the premier to Mkhwanazi himself. And that's quite important. These are not just random speculative accusations. This is in some ways a government-wide, provincial-wide push to say that there is a serious problem going on right now. So that's the backdrop. And then, of course, the president gives us 7 days to speculate about what he's going to do. And everyone fills that vacuum with their own theories. And as usual, various things get leaked to the Sunday Times and News 24. And people think they know what's going to happen. And we get told that a minister's plane is grounded and there could be a cabinet reshuffle. The usual speculation. One day we need to talk about the speculation and the way stuff gets leaked to specific media houses. But ultimately, the president comes forward and late, again, 37 minutes late from the initial 7 o'clock announcement, the president walks onto stage and in a very brief announcement announces this commission, the clip that you've just seen. Now, before we get into the merits of this commission, and I am going to come out quite strongly against this whole delay tactic action. One other thing, I find it spectacularly disappointing that we have got to the point in our country where no one is able to ask the president any serious questions. And this has been able to drag on for years at this point. You can be as critical as you like of the Mandela presidency. He used to come out and answer questions. You can criticize Mbeki all you like. He would come and he would answer questions and have press conferences. I was one of the most critical people of the Jacob Zuma presidency you can imagine. But he answered way more questions and did way more interviews than President Ramaphosa. President Ramaphosa has been mollycoddled by the mainstream media in South Africa. They have allowed him to occupy a position of impunity in which he feels he no longer needs to account to the nation. He can do these one-way broadcasts, even in times of crisis. And your voice, my voice, big media voices don't get heard. And that must be a wonderful position to be in. You're the most powerful person in the country, and you don't have to take any questions. And don't tell me about doorstops, because that's not a venue for accountability. A 1-minute quick interview where the president is rushing with his entourage, and that is seen as, being open to the media. I mean, I've even interviewed the deputy president, so he's made himself available for interviews. And I'm not saying I should interview him. Wonderful, I'd love him to come on the channel. But someone should be able to regularly interview the president, especially when there are these times of crisis. And the shutting down of these questions is mirrored by the shutting down of investigations around the president when we look at questions like Phala. So while we talk about rule of law, one of the core aspects of rule of law within our constitutional setup is transparency and openness. The fact that those who are powerful need to be able to engage with the citizenry and don't stand apart from the citizenry on some perch of power. And yet, today we have a presidency which has all this power and none of the accountability checks that a healthy democracy imposes on a powerful presidency, especially from the media. Because the first line of defense and accountability is not parliament and not the judiciary. Those things are important, but they take time. The immediacy of media questioning is key and core to governmental power, and we just don't have that. And what astounds me is that the media doesn't even ask for it anymore. It's as if they're in on the situation and they're just like, oh, it's fine. Well, there's certainly no loud protests, maybe a few grumblings here and there. If it was any other president, it would be a national crisis. So I do want to say that. Now let's get on to the Commission of Inquiry. Again, here I've seen some interesting perspectives. There are very few people who are extremely excited about this. There are some people who think that, okay, the president didn't have many other options. A commission allows due process, and at least he can then get to the bottom of these allegations. And then there are those who just think this whole thing is just a waste of time. I must say, I'm kind of in the middle of the second and third camps. Those who are saying that, well, what was the president supposed to do? Again, we can't be asking 7 years into a presidency, what was the president supposed to do? Over the last 7 years, he was supposed to rebuild the criminal justice system so that we didn't even get to this point. The fact that we are here now is itself an illustration of the failure to deliver on the promise of cleaning up the criminal justice system. So you can't ignore all of those failures and then just be like, oh, well, his hands were tied. Well, if you tie your own hands, then you can't complain about having your hands tied. But the other thing I feel is that you can't equate due process with a commission of inquiry. A commission of inquiry is a very specific and special creature that can only be used in certain instances. And presidents have an array, and governments have an array of options open to them. Parliament, there are special investigations, there's the SIU, there's a special institute inside the police called IPID, which is supposed to investigate police wrongdoing. But because that hasn't been rebuilt over the last 7 years, we now stand back and say the president's hands are tied. Another example of how hands are tied because hands were tied themselves by the person whose hands are now tied. So because there's been a failure to rebuild institutions, because there's been a failure to inject proper resources into the criminal justice system, because the NPA itself hasn't covered itself in glory, we now sit in a situation where the only option that is available that has any credibility is a commission of inquiry. But we should ask how we got to this point in the first place. So I wouldn't conflate due process with a commission of inquiry. There are many aspects of due process. There would have been, had promises been kept, many options available to the president. But we also shouldn't rule out firing a minister with allegations this serious. I mean, yeah, bring him back later, but one thing I find interesting is there are people who say that a president can't find anyone guilty or cannot investigate himself. And sure, I agree if that is maintained consistently. But Andrew Whitfield didn't go through a commission of inquiry. President woke up one day and said, you're fired because you went to the United States. Now, we can argue about whether deputy ministers should take international trips. But I think we can all agree that is not as grave a situation as confronts many different ministers. We have very solid evidence that Senzo Mchunu has misled Parliament and hasn't been able to explain that misleading or account for the contradictory evidence. So why are you able to mislead Parliament on the one hand without an explanation and not be fired, whereas if you go on an international trip and you happen to come from a different political party, you're fired in 24 hours. There's something inconsistent at the heart of the actions of this presidency, and it goes to the politics of the ANC. Lord, grant me the job security of an ANC politician. It doesn't matter what you do. You can do anything. You will be brought back. And even if you get fired from one position, you get brought back to another position. And before you know it, you turn around, you're like, no ways, is that person now in parliament? That person, but what happened? Like, there's a deeper problem at the heart of the ANC where the president, the leader of the ANC, is unable to take decisive action against his own because of the political blowback that may create. And people can try to deflect and say this commission of inquiry was about due process. It would be naive in the extreme to assume that politics has nothing to do with this decision to kick the can down the road. This road is so long and this can has been kicked so much, I don't even think there's a can left anymore. And the road is just tired of the can. That's how much the can has been kicked in the last 7 years of this presidency. So I'm underwhelmed, and I feel like citizens have every right to be underwhelmed because, quite frankly, we've seen what commissions do before. And those who are the minority of people who are coming out in defense of a commission as the only right thing to do, I have a question for you. Name me one time when a commission of inquiry resolved an urgent problem in South Africa. Did the TRC do that? Did the Marikana Commission do that? Did the Zondo Commission do that? And worse, what it seems like we have here is not a confined and defined short commission which will look at specific issues, but a sprawling, rambling, open-ended commission. And goodness only knows how long it could go for. And by the time we get a conclusion, we are all going to be bored stiff and we're going to have lost the capacity to care. Let me give you a quick scenario as to why I am just so underwhelmed by all of this. The Zondo Commission, the famous state capture commission, do you know how long it was initially supposed to last? It was supposed to last 180 days or 6 months. When did it conclude? Well, it hasn't concluded yet because everything is still up in the air. It started in 2018, 19, 20, 2021, 2022. Report was released. 2023, 2024, 2025. It's 7 years later. And can you tell me which specific things have been categorically resolved by that commission as it relates to state capture? Like 1.0, we're on version 9.0 right now, and we still haven't dealt with 1.0 because the commission took long. The Marikana Commission, which also involved Cyril Ramaphosa, by the way. Did anything definitively get resolved? Did anyone get definitively held to account? No. And that was even longer ago. That's like 2012 situations now. So I would like to know what commissions resolve. What commissions do is they add an air of judicial authority to a political process of delay. That's what they do. And because there is an air of judicial authority, people sit back and they say, oh, no, well, there's a judge and, well, we must be very, obedient here and, this is very serious and solemn. But it's ultimately a political decision. Now, I'm not casting aspersions on Justice Mahlanga, who's an excellent jurist, penned many important judgments, and who I'm sure will discharge his responsibility with gusto. But what I'm saying is that it falls within a broader political context, and sometimes you are a creature of the political context into which you are thrust. Same with Justice Zondo. So that commission of inquiry is going to have its work cut out for it, because I can assure you that no more than 2 weeks in, if it doesn't seem to be getting serious, getting urgent, getting to the root of the matter and proposing serious consequences, it's going to be another farce. And I hate to say that. Now, another reason why I think what we heard yesterday was underwhelming is that we do not have a time frame for this commission. What the president came to the nation and said was, there will be an interim report in 3 months, and there will be an interim report in 6 months. And then the commission will submit its report to the president, parliament, and the judiciary. But he didn't say when. So what we currently know right now is that we have a commission of inquiry, the end date of which is unknown. But we might get some interim reports in 6 months and 3 months. And this is urgent? This is how we deal with an urgent crisis? Like, what's going to happen when there's nuclear Armageddon in the world? South Africa will be like, let's have a commission of inquiry, and in 9 months' time, we'll have an interim report to see whether we can, whether humanity can survive. So I'm just not convinced that this reflects the urgency that the nation feels at the moment. And it's not just about Mkhwanazi and General Mkhwanazi's allegations. It's about a broader drift that is happening in the country where nothing seems to get done, nothing seems to get resolved, nothing seems to get fixed, no one seems to get held accountable eventually. Everything drags and drags and drags, and the crises compound and compound, and no one can get a handle on moving things forward such that the public confidence then moves with the leader. And that's really why I think Mkhwanazi has become such a figure and a symbol of hope in South Africa. Because he's the only person who is actually decisive. He's the only person who actually takes the bull by the horns and says, you know what, South Africa, screw all of this protocol and procedure. I'm going to talk to you directly and tell you that there are serious things happening in the country that you need to know about, and people are hiding them from you. And look, he may be right and he may be wrong and he may be involved in all sorts of other things. But one thing is that he is fulfilling the desire for decisive leadership. And so long as Mkhwanazi keeps doing that and everyone else around him keeps playing the delay game, the public is going to support Mkhwanazi more and more and more. And I'm not so sure if politicians fully appreciate how much public support Mkhwanazi has right now, precisely because he is an antidote to the last 7 years, we could maybe even call it the last 30 years of delay politics. It's deeper than just commissions. It's even on policy issues. There's delay on land. There's delay on healthcare. There's delay on education. This GNU doesn't even have a policy platform. So everything is just being postponed and delayed in the country, and it's creating a great sense of anxiety. My friend Ashraf Garda said we need a commission of inquiry into commissions of inquiry. And I responded, followed by a national dialogue on the national dialogue. Because it's getting one day we're just going to have a commission into commissions. And then there'll be a commission into that commission, and maybe there's an infinite spiral of commissions that we need to see. And then we'll unlock the mysteries of the universe when we get to the final commission. This country of ours, man. Okay, so then we have the appointment of Professor Firoz Cachalia. Now, I must say, I think that Professor Cachalia is someone who we can place some trust in. The reason for that is he's a well-known activist. He comes from outside the career political landscape. It is true that he is very enmeshed in ANC politics. I think he was seconded onto the NEC, if I'm not mistaken, so he's there, or at least at some point in his life he was seconded onto the NEC as an additional member. Obviously comes from an extremely political ANC family, and he's very much kind of in ANC veterans politics. So he's not someone who has come out bravely against ANC misgovernance, but I think from within the ANC, he's been a critical voice pushing for change. And as I say, he's not angling for top ANC leadership. He's not a career politician. He's a serious law professor. And that kind of expertise might be really important now. I believe he actually teaches administrative law at Wits, and this is a really important area of law, particularly for this crisis, because it deals with what the executive can and can't do and the powers that it has. So he'll bring a wealth of constitutional administrative law experience to the post. And as a relative outsider, I think that objectivity could be useful. However, while I think that Firoz Cachalia is a good candidate for police minister, there are still a spider's nest of questions around the constitutionality of this appointment. And because the president didn't take questions or provide any guidance or clarity on this decision, and I won't put it higher than this at the moment, there are some constitutional questions about this appointment. Because here's what we heard. Senzo Mchunu will be placed on a leave of absence. # must be nice. Leave of absence, ANC politicians, full pay, probably still some of your staff. And since this commission's going to go on for a year, chilled, sit back, write a book, smoke a pipe, live your best life while South Africa appoints another commission. So he's on a leave of absence, costing the taxpayer goodness knows how much. Then there's the commission, which is going to cost the taxpayer goodness knows how much. Then there's going to be a new minister who costs the taxpayer goodness knows how much. Then there are 2 deputy ministers who cost the taxpayer goodness knows how much. And by the way, what do deputy ministers do if they can't even stand in now when the minister's on a leave of absence, by the way? Then what's the point of deputy ministers? 77 members of the national executive. The president has promised since day one that he's going to cut cabinet. And yet now we have a crisis. What's the move? Not, okay, I'm going to use this opportunity. People say, what would you do if you were president? You know what I would do? I would use this opportunity to say, South Africans are tired, I'm cutting cabinet. We're reconsolidating cabinet. We're going to cut cabinet, cut deputy ministers. I don't care what the consequences are. I've only got three years left. It's not about my political life. It's about giving the nation confidence that this new configuration is going to move the country forward. Why can't that happen? Why is being decisive so impossible? It's like we have not had leadership for so long that we've forgotten what leadership even looks like as a country. So back to the Mchunu situation. So Cachalia, so the president then says, so Mchunu's going on leave. He doesn't tell us who's going to act in his stead, but someone will act in his stead. Maybe that announcement is coming out today or something. But he doesn't say one of the 2 deputy ministers will act in the interim. He just tells us, well, we'll figure it out. And then he says, when Cachalia's appointment comes to an end at WITS, shout out to the WITS academics out there. Hey, cabinet posts for WITS academics. Yo, life is good. Life is good. Who knows? So then he says, Cachalia is going to come when his term ends. But Mchunu will continue to be on a leave of absence while Cachalia acts, while the commission investigates. So Cachalia's term is this open-ended term that is dependent on the commission's work. So he could be there for 2 years, 1 year, 9 months, 18 months, and 4 years, judging by the Zondo Commission. So we're in limbo here, and one of the interesting constitutional questions is whether a president can appoint a minister from outside the National Assembly and outside the National Executive, which he is allowed to do. He's allowed to appoint 2. But whether he's allowed to appoint one into a ministry when there is already someone there, even if they're on a leave of absence. To put that in other words, if there is no vacancy, can the president appoint a minister from the outside into that ministry while the erstwhile minister is on a leave of absence? And it's a legal question that will require a lot more research and depth of understanding going forward. It may even involve some kind of legal challenge, but it is a question at the very least, because we know the president has full power to appoint and remove ministers. That's clear from the Constitution. Now, we also know that There's no cap to the size of cabinet, so that's fine. But in terms of Section 98 of the Constitution, the president can assign any power or function to a member who is absent or unable to act. So he can assign any power or function to another member, but that seems to be to another member of the national executive, not someone from outside who then is parachuted in. And that's why when Zweli Mkhize, for example, went on special leave, a different minister took on his responsibilities. I think it was Mamloko Kubai, if I'm not mistaken. So she held her current ministerial post, but also took on Zweli Mkhize's responsibilities because she was already in the national executive at the time. She was already in cabinet. But Cachalia is not like that because he's not an existing minister. He's coming from the outside. So can you come from the outside and assume the role of minister while there's no vacancy because the minister's on special leave? And we know that a vacancy only occurs when the minister is removed. So one interpretation at the moment seems to be that that's not constitutionally possible. Now, the president might have ways around this. He might say that, well, the Constitution gives me wide powers of appointment, and I believe this is possible. And he'll look at particularly the section in the Constitution which allows him to appoint people from outside and say that, well, if I'm allowed to appoint people from outside, then similarly I should be allowed to do the same things that I'm able to do with cabinet ministers with those people that I appoint from outside. But what the president might do to get around it is maybe he'll appoint Cachalia as a minister without portfolio or something, or he'll appoint him into cabinet because there's no cap on the number of ministers you can appoint. And then once Cachalia is a member of cabinet, he'll assign the responsibilities to Cachalia. But at present, Cachalia will have to be a member of cabinet, it appears on the face of it, in order to assume that role. But as I say, it's currently an open legal question. This was only announced late last night, so I'm sure wise legal minds will apply their minds to it. But at the very least, we have a situation that's unclear legally as to how is Cachalia going to come in, how is he going to be appointed, what's going to happen with Senzo Mchunu, and what happens when you don't have a vacancy but you have a new acting minister. So once again, a lack of clarity and confusion which could be resolved by just questioning, and we don't have that questioning. Now, furthermore, we have a situation in which it's unclear at the present moment what is going on with the rest of cabinet. Because again, this would have been a golden opportunity for the president to reconfigure his cabinet. We have cabinet ministers who have done much worse than Andrew Whitfield. And again, remember, I carry no can for the DA, but I'm just saying that we need consistency in government. Maybe it was a good thing that the president fired a deputy minister. It created a sense of accountability, and South Africans were like, wow, okay, there's some backbone. But we need that across the board. So what happens now with the Minister of Higher Education? Also under fire for misleading comments, treating Parliament with disrespect. Various other ministers have been named in the state capture report, have been named or face serious allegations, and the president hasn't placed them on special leave. So when do you go on special leave and when do you not go on special leave? What's the criteria? How serious do the allegations have to be, etc.? Do you need a press conference for a national commissioner to be placed on special leave? So there's just, between Whitfield, other ANC cabinet ministers, and Mchunu, there's just too much inconsistency in the way things are being handled. So how do we assess this in conclusion going forward? Well, let me see if any real questions that we should answer. Otherwise, let me conclude here, because I want to talk about where we are in the Ramaphosa presidency, where we are in the GNU, and what this means more broadly.
So just the main question or sentiment that's coming out is people trying to play devil's advocate and say, okay, apart from the decision that the president took to announce a commission of inquiry, what else could he have done? And how differently could he have handled the situation?
Cool. Well, I feel like I dealt with that at the beginning, because when you ask that question, you make so many concessions to the president that you forgive the fact that he's been president for 7 years and failed to rebuild the other institutions of accountability that should have been in place here? Why is IPID still broken? Why is the president not acting on Mchunu in the same way he acted on Whitfield? Why should we allow this open-ended commission? Even if we were to assume a commission is a good idea, surely you can't tell me that this can't be done in 3 months. First interim report, 3 months, then 6 months, then a year. But here's the other thing. What that argument also misses, what could the president do, is what do you think will happen after a commission? Because that's what I want to know. I would turn the question around and say to you, what assurance can you give me that a commission is going to do anything? Because I've heard people say, well, the police are compromised, so the police can't investigate. Okay, but then what's Judge Madlanga going to do? He's going to make recommendations that the police are going to have to follow up eventually. So you just kick the can further down the road. But ultimately, we still need those institutions. So what could the president have done? Rebuilt institutions quicker so that there were some institutions other than commissions of inquiry that could have been used, and got more decisive. I don't think a suspension would be out of the question right now. I don't even think firing would be out of the question right now, and people have been fired for less. So, again, I remain underwhelmed.
Someone asks, is it not time to re-establish the Scorpions?
I think so, and it's pretty sad that the Scorpions were disbanded. In fact, I had this thought that the political killings task team in some ways mirrors the Scorpions, because we have this situation where in South Africa, if an anti-corruption unit gets too powerful, what happens is it becomes a political magnet and it gets destroyed by politicians. And that seems to be what happened with the political killings task team. It was like, hey, you were supposed to just deal with these political killings in KZN. Now you're uncovering criminal syndicates running aspects of the government. You're doing too much, you're revealing too much, and now you're becoming a political problem. So yes, until we do have those institutions that we can trust, that are independent, and that can truly fight crime and corruption without fear or favor, we'll perpetually be in this situation. And that's why I think, let me riddle me this. $1 billion on state capture commission, right? Could quite frankly be a similar amount on this commission. 700 million on the national dialogue, right? Probably another 10 million in deputy ministers and 2 ministers right now in the police. Put all of that together and you might have something like 2.5 billion rand. But let's call it 2. Let's call it 2 billion, right? You're telling me we can't take 2 billion rand and pour it into the criminal justice system? The judiciary is begging for more money. We're actually cutting funds to the judiciary. You should see the state of South Africa's courts right now. The Scorpions, building an independent institution like that. Crime intelligence, appointing the right people and equipping crime intelligence with the resources it needs. More police on the streets for better visibility. We could have taken 2 billion rand and said, okay, we're ring fencing 2 billion rand for the criminal justice system. No more commissions, whatever, let bygones be bygones if we have to. But going forward, this money is going to be spent to make South Africans safer. I ask you, will this commission make you safer? I'm not convinced.
There's also a question to say, why has the president not mentioned the Deputy National Police Commissioner, Sibiya, in his announcement yesterday?
That's an interesting one, and I'll end on this question. See, I took questions, people. I took questions. Let's take one more, just in the spirit of taking questions. That was an interesting omission. Now, in truth, as far as I must check this. If someone knows in the comments, I'm not sure whether the president has the power to appoint the commissioner, but I'm not so sure about the powers he has over Shadrack's Sibiya. But be that as it may, the complete omission. He actually doesn't really mention Mkhwanazi except to say that he had a press conference either. So, yeah, it is a bit strange. And again, for all the commission fans out there, which I'm sure are very few, what happens when the commission's done? The commission recommends, and then the police must still decide what. The commission can say, we recommend a suspension, and the police can say no. That's happening. We have Zondo Commission implicated cabinet ministers in cabinet right now because the president said, yeah. So again, the only way to do this is to say, I'm appointing the right people, and the president has had 7 years to appoint the right people who then filter good ethical leadership down into the rest of the institution. And if that hasn't happened by now, I don't know when it's going to happen. We'll take one more question.
Nothing that I've picked up so far, but
Cool.
From what I've just quickly tried to fact check, he does have the power to do that.
The deputy.
Yeah,
that makes sense
That's
with the commissioner and the
subject to
deputy.
Fact checking. Yeah.
So yeah, that's an interesting question and one that I'll pick up in future subsequent videos. Thanks for that interesting insight. Cool, everyone. Yeah. So look, I mean, I think for me, the Ramaphosa presidency it's really stumbling at this point. You know, where I started this video was I said there was a time when President Ramaphosa could literally breathe and people would write articles about how that had created accountability and a new, remember the new dawn? New dawn, everyone. But now I just get a great sense of cynicism, you know, in a sense in which people have resigned themselves to the country moving sideways, if not inching backwards, but very slowly. And that's a difficult place to be. I will be the first person to congratulate serious movement on economic growth, better governance, especially in townships, rural areas, lifting people out of poverty and informal settlements, the right appointments to criminal justice institutions so that we can overcome this rot. But at present, it feels to me like the president and the government is treading water. And our expectations have been set so low that treading water feels like moving forward at this point. And that's a dangerous place to be. So, if anything, one thing that's positive that comes out of this is that the pretenses can now be dropped. General Mkhwanazi's allegations clearly have not been dismissed as nonsense. And hopefully we can get to the bottom of them. Oh yeah, one more thing I wanted to say is, in terms of the commission itself, it's going to be quite fascinating. Is Ramaphosa going to be called as a witness? Will he be cross-examined? Because there we may actually get answers to questions. So Justice Madlanga and team are going to have to make sure that everyone is able to be questioned here. Because I'd like to know, what did the president know? What didn't he know? What did he do? What didn't he do? Of course, Senzo Mchunu will be a witness. We'll be able to get his side of the story. He'll be cross-examined, hopefully. General Mkhwanazi, imagine his testimony. Can you imagine when General Mkhwanazi sits down and explains his events? And also, when he's cross-examined, we'll be able to see, does his story add up? And so, if there is a virtue out of this commission, it's moments like that. But I really feel we could do that very quickly, rather than like this 1 year situation. The Zondo Commission spent more time on tea breaks than I think, it probably adds up to a year just of tea breaks. Like, get the main people in the room, get their evidence, cross-examine the evidence, determine to the best of your ability in a very short time frame what the situation is, make recommendations, and then most of all, act on those recommendations. And right now, we may have an investigative body, but I'm not convinced the time frame is right, and I'm not convinced that once the recommendations get made, that there will be the political will to carry them through. Okay, I think that's enough for today. Like, share, subscribe. Thank you for joining SMWX. If you agree or disagree, comment down below. This is always just a platform for debate and, shall we say, national dialogue. I believe there's, one more question? Oh, okay.
I just want to fact check something we said earlier.
Oh, yeah.
That he doesn't actually have the powers, the president, that is to...
There we go, yeah.
The national commissioner appoints...
Yeah, that was my initial intuition. So President Ramaphosa can't appoint Shadrach Sibiya or suspend him. That's the national commissioner. But he can suspend Masemola. So I think that's how it works. We'll check that out in more detail as well. So that's why some people have been saying, why isn't the president doing this, doing that? He doesn't have the power to do it. But he appoints the commissioner and he speaks to the commissioner. And presumably the person he appointed should have the ability to do the right thing in the other layers and the other tiers. Otherwise, it's the wrong appointment. So, yeah. Awesome. Cool. Like, share, subscribe. We want to show you an interesting new development because we've built this podcast into one of the biggest podcasts in South Africa. But we are now open to helping you to build your podcast. We've learned a lot about how to shoot, edit, and distribute a podcast. So if you have a podcast and you're looking for a studio, you're looking for a visual team, guess what? We are now able to help you. So check out Ayeye Studios, like, share, subscribe. Thank you for taking us to 250,000 subscribers. Next stop, 300K. We'll leave you with this new advert, and I hope that you will come and shoot your podcast at Ayeye Studios. Link or email address is in the bio of SMWX, and we'll also put an email address in the comments and pin that comment. See you at Ayeye Studios. Come shoot your podcast and contribute to the ecosystem that's changing South Africa's narrative. Ayeye. Ready to take your podcast to the next level? At Ayeye Studios, you can film, edit, and release your podcast all in one place. From crisp visuals to clean sound, we've got you covered, and we can even distribute your podcast on YouTube and other platforms. The best part? It's brought to you by the same team that brings you SMWX quality. Are you ready to take your podcast to the next level? Welcome to Ayeye Studios.